Hello, everybody, and welcome to Taking Control, the ADHD podcast on True Story FM. I'm Pete Wright, and I'm here with Nikki Kinzer.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Pete Wright.
Hi, Nikki. Does this represent a pivot today, what we're doing?
It's a pivot, and it was a problem that we solved.
It's a pivoted problem solved. A pivot problem solved.
It's a PPP.
It's PPS.
No, PPS. Dang, I wanted it to be a PPP, but it's a PPS.
It is a PPS. We are talking about, we're talking about problem solving, ADHD problem solving. Mm-hmm. And that's exciting because sometimes problems with the ADHD brain are very hard to solve, and sometimes they're very easy. What is the difference between when it's easy and when it's hard? What tools can we use to make that better? That's what we're talking about today. Before we dig in, head over to takecontroladhd.com, get to know us a little bit better. You can listen to the show right there on the website or subscribe to the mailing list, and we'll send you an email each time a new episode is released. You can connect with us on Blue Sky or Facebook or Instagram or Pinterest at Take Control ADHD. But to really connect with us, join us in the Take Control ADHD Discord community. Super easy to jump right into the general community chat channels at takecontroladhd.com/Discord, where you'll be whisked over to the general invitation and log in. Of course, if you're looking for a little more, particularly if the show has ever touched you or helped you understand your relationship with ADHD in a new way, we invite you to support the show directly through Patreon. That's listener-supported podcasting. And for a few bucks a month, you help guarantee that we continue to grow the show. You get access to me and Nikki in special member-only sessions, coaching and tech and coffee and happy hours and all kinds of things at the different tiers coming up. We'd love to get to know you a little bit better and have you join our fantastic, fantastic community. Visit patreon.com/theADHDpodcast. That's patreon.com/theADHDpodcast to learn more. Shifting gears, Nikki, cue that V8 rumble. We're going to shift those gears.
Yes.
Yeah.
Isn't that a creative little title?
It's very creative. I'm created.
Tell
me about where this came from.
All right. So we're going to do a few shows diving into some of the ADHD symptoms that aren't often discussed, because we do talk a lot about time management, organization, getting started, not getting started, motivation, all of those things that we talk a lot about. But there are a few things that come up that aren't always talked about, aren't always clear, and it's hard to get information around them. So I'm hoping that we can shed some light on problem solving.
Let's do it. All right.
Yeah.
So why do we start this series with problem solving? Why talk about problem solving?
Well, first of all, I was inspired with this topic because I was talking to a new client of mine, and it was something that she felt like she was struggling with. And I thought, it's interesting because it's not something, again, that's really brought up. Everything else is brought up, but not this specific thing. And I feel like if there is a problem if there is a problem to be solved, then something is happening that you probably didn't expect.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're actually doing is facing some kind of adversity, right? There's some kind of adjustment that needs to be made, or something's happening. And how often does that happen? I mean, every day.
Yeah, like all the time. But the challenge is, like, you're not often clear-headed enough to see that.
Right.
It just feels like, oh, it's a problem. And I guess
and
I'll
it happens
never know
every
why.
day.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And here I am again, right?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So I want to talk a little bit about what happens to your brain when this happens, because it does depend on what the problem is. And with ADHD, you mentioned it in the intro, like some problems are really easy to solve and some things aren't. And the ADHD brain definitely, takes a part in that. So the strengths of the ADHD brain when it comes to problem solving is thinking about how creative a person can be. A lot of innovators have ADHD, a lot of inventors, a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of people that can think outside of the box. They welcome the challenge, right? They want to be challenged. And so when this problem comes, they have this new drive to them. And persistence is a strength of ADHD. You can't let it go until you solve it. right? You get hyper focused on this particular problem, whatever it may be. So there's this determination that can come from the ADHD brain. But there are a few challenges as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the biggest ones to highlight are the all or nothing thinking,
Yeah.
the black and white thinking that happens with ADHD. And it happens so quickly that you don't even notice that it's happening until probably somebody like me as a coach brings it to your attention. But when we're looking at all or nothing thinking, here's this problem that has come, and you only think of it like there's only one solution, or the day has been ruined because something didn't happen in the morning, and so the afternoon is gone.
Yeah, this is the cognitive dissonance of ADHD, though, right?
Yes.
Because you just said we welcome the challenge to think outside of the box, which implies let's look at a lot of possible solutions on many different horizons, and suddenly there will be only one, right? Like suddenly there can be a shift, and we stop being able to see all of the solutions. Like the overwhelm of choice becomes too overwhelming, which is
Yes.
the peril of intermittent reinforcement, right? That I can feel confident when sometimes it works and I can see a lot of things. And then I can feel absolutely 3 inches tall when many times it doesn't work. And
Right.
I feel a lot of shame that goes along with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that I hope I explained this correctly. You know how with ADHD, everything feels urgent, right? It's really difficult to prioritize. And I think that is the same thing with a problem, that a problem can arise and it feels, even though it may not be a big problem, it feels like a big problem. And
Hmm.
so then there's all of this like baggage that comes around that, right? Even though it's probably something that you can solve and you really can have the rest of your afternoon, but it feels
Yeah,
bigger than it is.
right.
Uh, and I think that the next thing I'm going to talk about is not just the ADHD brain, it's just human nature. If
Hmm.
you're in a crisis, you either freeze or what is it, fight?
Yeah, it's fight or flight, right? Fight, flight,
Yeah.
or flee, I think are the
Yeah.
big three.
And so when you're in a crisis, like for example, you get into a car accident, maybe it's just a bump, not a big car accident, but it's just um, you rear end somebody. You may shut down because it's
Hmm.
like you're kind of in a little bit of shock, right?
Hmm.
And so that's a challenge because you're overwhelmed with the situation. So you're not going to think clearly. So giving ourselves some grace, because I bring this up because this was one of the examples that was brought up to me, and having to kind of walk through the situation and normalize that what this person was feeling was actually very normal. Like you're not going to necessarily think of every single thing to do when you hit somebody, you know, and
Yeah, that's really interesting. And just a brief sidebar.
yeah.
I so I it, my daughter was in a car accident, a very minor one. This was a long time ago, and actually just didn't stop quick enough because of moving traffic, heavy traffic, and bumped into the back of another car.
Hmm.
And um, but my daughter is trained medically, so the first thing they do is get out of the car and see if everyone is okay in the other car and check for things like head injury and all of that stuff, and is supremely confident because of their competence.
Yeah.
And at one point, the driver of the other car says, "I'm just going to call the police." And everything falls apart
Mm,
because suddenly they're outside of their realm of competence and experience, right?
right.
It went from medicine to the law, and the law is unknown territory. Murray Gell-Mann is a scientist, or was a scientist. I believe he passed away, and he came up with Gell-Mann amnesia with Michael Crichton. I think I've talked about this on the show,
Mm,
where it's the whole idea that you're reading a newspaper and you read the front page story and it's something you know a lot about, you have high competence and expertise, and you think, oh, the newspaper's ridiculous, this person got all the facts wrong. But then you turn the page and now you're reading something that's in a field that is not your domain expertise, and you're like, wow, that's really interesting. the odds of them being factually inaccurate to an expert on the page you know nothing about are just as high as they were on the front page when they were factually inaccurate with something you do know a lot about. But we forget that. So I think it's
Right.
really important to understand like where the paralysis is coming from in a crisis situation.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that seems to imply a tool that we can employ when we're not in crisis situations to help ourselves feel more confident later. Like if you need to understand, if you're overwhelmed by the law in traffic, you could read up on what you actually have to do in a minor traffic accident so that you
Mhm.
feel confident and not overwhelmed. That kind of a thing. Does that
Yes.
make any sense? Am I just
Yes. No,
word vomiting?
absolutely. No, 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 no.
Yeah.
It makes a lot
And
of sense.
competence, increasing competence is really important to help for ADHD, to help avoid these kinds of crisis shutdowns.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, and it is interesting because we did talk about like what would be the steps you would do if this happens again,
Yeah.
right? So that
Right.
you do feel more confident in what you would do or
Yeah.
what could happen next time, which hopefully there's never next time.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Exactly. Right.
uh, the next piece I think is that can be challenging, and I see this especially like with students, is you're studying for something, and now you've got to study for a test, and there's these problems that you have to solve, but you're still processing learning the information on how to
Hmm.
solve the problem, right? So it takes time. It takes listening to the lecture again. It takes listening to the lecture plus reading what was in the text and reviewing your notes. Like it just giving yourself some space to process what you're learning and then being able to apply it, and not just expecting that you're going to get it out of, just one lecture. And
Yeah.
this I was talking to my daughter specifically about this because she's a psychology major, and so right now she's taking all of the basic like psych 101, psych 102, all of these basic courses, and right now she's all the psych class is all about the brain and all of the different parts of the brain and the names, and it's confusing,
Yeah.
for the first time when you just learn this. And I was trying to reassure her that like you're going to be uh this is going to be part of your course, like all of your courses going forward. Like this isn't something you're just learning once and then they expect you to know about. Like if you were just
Hmm.
taking the psych class just to take the psych class, yeah, sure, you're going to memorize it and you're going to take the test and then you're going to forget about it.
Hmm.
But for you, it's different because she wants to be a therapist. You need to know how the brain works. You need to know why these things happen and how
Hmm.
they all connect. But it's not just in one class. It's going to
Right.
follow you, through all of your courses, and eventually you're going to know it like that,
Hmm.
like anything that you become competent in. So I think I hope to reassure her that I don't need to know it all right now, and that, it will take time to figure it out.
Hmm.
Emotional dysregulation. Whoa, that's a big
Hmm.
one. When a problem is happening, when something happens that you're not expecting, especially, you can get angry, you can get frustrated that the problem even exists. You can become reactive, avoidant, um, argumentative, right? A lot of
Hmm.
things could happen there with
Yeah.
that emotional dysregulation.
Yeah. And emotional dysregulation is the giant wall that prevents you from processing clearly.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so understand this goes back to the tools that you employ while you're not dysregulated,
Yes.
which is so hard to
Oh,
say,
so hard to
right?
say.
It's so hard to say. Uh,
Yeah.
but because you never, that's the challenge of emotional dysregulation. You never know what's going to trigger it, right? You never know what you're going to run into on a given day that will throw you out of sorts
It's
and
true.
cause all of the other things, right?
It's so
Slow
true.
processing, freezing, uh, paralysis.
Yeah. And I
Okay.
have to say, I think in a lot of moments, it's okay to just throw your hands up in the air and say, "Okay, I'm done for the day.
Yeah.
I'm going to
Yeah.
start again tomorrow."
Yeah.
Like we got to give ourselves some grace.
But now
Uh,
we're going to talk about transitioning into like, what do you do,
oh,
coach?
it is such a practical. I am going to talk about some practical ways to approach problem solving, and then I'm going to talk about some less practical ways.
Oh, good. All right.
So we're going to see both the practical and the non-practical. But uh, so this is this is not going to be surprising to anybody. You have to identify what the problem is, right? We need to be specific. What is it that we are dealing with? And I love uh, the exercise that you had us do a few episodes back, where we were talking about the limiting belief and,
structured journaling.
Yeah, the structured journaling. And that's when I was writing this outline, I was thinking about that. Like, we've got to keep it factual, right? Let's take the emotion out. Let's take everything out that we think it is, but let's be factual. And so the example I have is that the morning meeting that you had ran late, and now you're behind on the rest of your day. That's the problem. Not going to talk about how I feel about it, why it happened. That's just what the issue is. I'm now behind. So my next question is this my problem?
Yeah.
Now, right? Because this is what I think is so baffling. You may surprise yourself how much stress or anxiety you may be taking on when the problem is not even yours to solve. Now, I am so guilty of this with my children. That I will take on their problems and I will try to solve them for them, and I will come up with all kinds of things, but it is not my problem to solve. Yeah. They're the ones that need to do it. They're the ones that need to have the life experience, right? So that's one area. But to keep going with the whole morning meeting thing. So is this my problem? Well, yes, it is, because it directly affects me. I need to deal with it, right? I need to figure out what kind of adjustments I need to make this afternoon. But the morning meeting did not run late because of me. It ran late because of Pete Wright.
Hey, now. But I think that's really important. Like what you're saying is it affects me, but not because of me.
Right.
Say that like 1,000 times.
Yes.
It affects me. I'll adjust because of it, but it's not because of me.
Yes.
Do not take on stress, which is not yours to own.
I don't need to take this on. Exactly. Exactly. And I'm not blaming you either. Like, it's just, this is the fact. These are the facts, right? So then what's next? What do I do here? So now I have to think of how I'm going to solve this problem. What needs to happen? In our next show, when we are talking about ADHD symptoms that aren't talked about, we are going to talk about how to make decisions, because that's a big one, right? That's a really difficult thing to do for a lot of people. But for this example, the decision is that I need to list out the adjustments that I need to make, and I need to prioritize like who I need to get in touch with. And then I need to take action. I need to, get a little list going, and I need to text people or make a plan or break it down or whatever. And I have another example about taking action and breaking things down. I had a client recently. There's been a lot of cold weather in the East Coast. He had frozen pipes, was going to start our meeting late. And as we were talking about his pipe situation, he's telling me about it, and he's like writing stuff down, because all of a sudden frozen pipes like has several little action steps that have to happen to get it fixed.
Right.
Right. So that's part of that process too, is that here's the problem, and here I need to break it down, because it's not just fixing a frozen pipe.
Right. But going back to what we were talking about before, crisis and emotional dysregulation, if you don't go through this sort of emotional dissociation with the thing that's going on, like frozen pipes, you will, for lack of a better word, freeze in this process, because you won't be able to functionally break it down and take that next smallest step. Yes. And sometimes, like I'm sure we're going to talk about this next week, sometimes you're going to have to make a decision based on incomplete or crappy information. And that is a muscle. You just have to learn to do it. And it stinks. Yeah. It's hard.
It's hard, for sure. Yeah. All right. So now I'm going to talk about some of the more less practical approaches of problem solving. This first one is acceptance. Woo, that's a hard one. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a coaching session, and all of a sudden I can see the light bulb in the person's eyes light up, where this kind of hits them, where, oh, okay, so you're telling me that plans actually do change, and what I thought was going to be I predicted the future and I was wrong. That acceptance that problems do come up. A task can turn into more tasks once you get into it. That's a big one that I've noticed with people is there's this frustration that I thought it was just going to be me, dealing with this one frozen pipe. But now it's not just this one frozen pipe, it's this and the hot water and all of
it
this
turns out that was a symptom of something much bigger.
That was much bigger. And that's so frustrating, but it is part of what happens. And so accepting that this is part of life and not to take the blame yourself. You didn't do anything wrong because you have a frozen pipe and it has more steps in it than what you thought it was going to. Like there isn't anything there to fix except for the frozen pipe, not you. Right? Like that's the separation.
Right.
We need to let go of the what ifs, the should have beens. I could have known, I could have done this if I knew this or done better or whatever. You did the best you could with what you knew at the time, period. Give yourself grace, learn from the situation. As we were talking about before, if we want to be better prepared in the situation of being in a car accident, then let's read that up. Let's figure out what would I do if I ran into somebody in the intersection. Learn from that situation. And then review the above steps. Is this a problem to be solved? Is it my problem to be solved? And, just giving ourselves a lot of grace.
You say this was a less practical approach, and I don't even think it's an approach. I think you just talked about like mindset, right? This is not an approach to solving a problem. This is what you have to do in order to do everything above.
Very true. Very good point.
Yeah.
So when I was doing some research around problem solving, I came across something that Dr. Hallowell had written. It is based it's a different take of the Serenity Prayer. So people are going to recognize it, but listen to the words because they are different.
Yeah.
And this is the first time that I have ever seen this from Dr. Hallowell. It was in an article that we'll go ahead and put into the show notes so you can see where I found it. But this was the first time I've ever read it, and I just thought it was really amazing. So this is from him. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the insight to prioritize wisely what I want to change, the patience to resist trying to control everything I could, had I the energy and time, the courage and skill to change the things I have chosen to change, and the wisdom to know the differences among all these. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, I really like that. And I'm really glad I came across it. So that's something to think about. The next two are, I suppose that they're less practical, but I think you're going to probably be able to tie them into these practical things too. But pausing when you feel dysregulated. We know that this is something that is taught to us, that if you start feeling heated, if your emotions are running high, sometimes the best thing to do is to get yourself out of the situation and walk away and be able to process. So this is something to think about when, you are in crisis or the problem is much bigger than you. It feels so big. Really recognizing like how this feels in your body. Are you getting heated? Are you flush? But noticing these things, and then settling down your nervous system. I'm sure that our dear friend, James Ochoa would have a lot to say about the need to settle our nervous system in these, in these emotional storms, right? We need to breathe. We need to get outside. We need to reset, and take some time to really process. And it's hard to come up with solutions when you're really upset.
Yeah.
And that's something to think about too, that this is not the time to skip to that step of, I need to brainstorm solutions. Let's take a moment and pause for, a few minutes or whatever you need.
Yeah.
The last thing that I want to talk about is talking it out. ADHD, folks are verbal processors. That's why coaching can be so effective, is that you need time to be able to talk out what you're thinking, what you're feeling. it makes a difference to hear yourself and to hear somebody else's perspective. You can work with other people to help you brainstorm. That's why teams and collaboration work so well, is that we don't have all of the answers. We feed off of each other. So in our weekly meeting, we call the Brain Trust here at Take Control ADHD, we are all coming up with ideas and, really working off of each other. That makes a difference. And so talking to other people and just really giving yourself some time to process things. And next week, we're going to talk about how to decide on those solutions. So stay tuned.
All right. Looking forward to it. This is a nice little trio. I think we have a trio of episodes.
Yes, we sure
the first. And we're excited to talk about all of these issues this way. Thank you, everybody, for downloading, listening to this show. We appreciate your time and your attention. Don't forget, if you have something to contribute about the conversation, we're heading over to the Show Talk channel in our Discord server, and you can join us right there by becoming a supporting member at the deluxe level or better. On behalf of Nikki Kinzer and Pete Wright, we'll see you right back here next week on Taking Control, the ADHD podcast.